Alright, diamonds in the rough, good job on completing last week's homework exercise. There were actually quite a few people who did the homework in the Discord. Overall, it looked pretty good. The thing is, this is not an easy exercise. This is actually one of the harder ones that you can do because you're drawing objects that are not aligned to the same perspective grid. So it requires a lot of intuition and guesswork to be able to draw things that look right. So if you did the exercise and you felt like it didn't look quite right, that's actually a good thing because it means that you can recognize that you still have room for improvement, but also it's because it's just a really hard exercise and it takes a lot of practice to get it right. Now this week we're going to focus on drawing ellipses and cylinders. The main reason why is because we need to know how to draw these if we want to use them to rotate boxes. And the other reason why is there are very specific rules when it comes to drawing ellipses, and if we want to get these ellipses to look right, we have to abide by these rules. The goal for this week's exercise is going to be drawing proper cylinders, and we also want to work on our line control and be able to draw the curves of the ellipses correctly, which also means that every line you draw is going to have to be done freehand. There are quite a few rules when it comes to drawing ellipses, so you might have to take notes while we go through this, but the first rule is that every single ellipse has a minor axis. This is a line that goes perpendicularly through the surface of an ellipse. The easiest way to explain it would be like this. These plates are circular, which means in perspective they appear like ellipses. This bar goes perpendicularly through the surface of these plates, meaning it's at 90 degrees to the surface, so this bar would be the minor axis of these ellipses. If we were to look at the ellipse in 2 dimensions, there would be another quirk to the minor axis. It always goes through the 2 least wide points of the ellipse. If we placed a point here and a point here, and then we drew a line like this, these are not the 2 least wide points of the ellipse. Same thing if we did this and this. These are not the 2 least wide points of the ellipse. In this particular ellipse, these are the 2 points that are closest to each other. So that means the minor axis goes through there, and that's actually going to be kind of helpful later on. There is another thing about the minor axis, and that's that it's going into the depth, meaning it's going towards a vanishing point. In this case, it's kind of hard to see where that vanishing point would be, but I would guess it would be somewhere over here, so that means the horizon line is like over there. This is another thing that's kind of important because if you want to draw ellipses that look like they move into the depth, you of course would need to use vanishing points. So you need to remember that your minor axis is always going to be moving towards a vanishing point. A second rule is that every ellipse also has a major axis, which is a line that always makes a 90-degree angle with our minor axis. The major axis does not go towards a vanishing point. Instead, this line just kind of exists and it always makes a 90-degree angle with the minor axis, no matter the perspective. For example, let's say we have a vanishing point over here, minor axis is over here. Our major axis will always be at 90 degrees to the minor axis, and then we can draw our ellipse. Then again, let's say we have a vanishing point over here, minor axis is going to be right here, major axis is going to be at 90 degrees to this minor axis, which means major axis is right here, and then we can draw our ellipse. Technically speaking, this isn't always true. There are scenarios where the minor axis does not make a 90-degree angle with the major axis, but it's only when we're dealing with very exaggerated perspectives, and it's not something you have to worry about when you're doing 2D art. Instead, just always remember it has to be a 90-degree angle. Also, remember how I said that the minor axis goes through the 2 least wide points of the ellipse? The major axis goes through the 2 widest points of the ellipse, which is another thing that's going to be helpful a little bit from now. Now for the last rule, we can see that our minor and major axes split the ellipse into 4 quadrants. Each one of these quadrants has to be identical. Of course, they're going to be mirrored, but proportion-wise, they have to be the same. This is true even in perspective. Normally, if we have a plane in perspective and we cut this in half, we can see that the half that's further away from us is going to be smaller than the half that's closer to us. With an ellipse, if we split it with the minor axis and the major axis, the half that's further away from us is going to be the exact same size as the half that's closer to us. I should probably point out, because some people could get confused about this, the halfway line that I drew in this plane is not the same as the major axis. The halfway line of this ellipse would probably be somewhere over here, meaning the half of the ellipse that's further away would still appear smaller than the half that's closer to us. The major axis just exists for the purposes of drawing the ellipse. It doesn't actually split it in half proportion-wise. This is something that we might have to worry about in a future homework exercise, but for now we don't. So just remember, the major axis is going to be exactly halfway inside of the ellipse, no matter the perspective. Now, that's it for the rules. Minor axis, major axis, and 4 identical quadrants. Now, let's draw some actual cylinders. All we're going to be doing for the homework exercise this week is just draw cylinders. We'll start with a horizon line. On this horizon line, we'll mark where we have a vanishing point. You can just randomly place that. Then we draw our minor axis towards that vanishing point. Then we need to place our major axis at 90 degrees to our minor axis. Now we need to decide the proportions of our ellipse, and here comes the trick. On our minor axis, we're going to mark how wide we want the ellipse to be. So if we place one point over here, it means that on the other side, that point has to be the exact same distance from the middle of the ellipse. These are the 2 least wide points of the ellipse, and then now we need to draw the 2 widest points of the ellipse. So let's say we just randomly place one point here, which means the other point is going to be the exact same amount of distance from the center, which would be over there. Now we have to draw the quadrants, and we have to make sure they're all identical. What's hard about this is that it starts curving a lot more the closer you get to one of these points. Meaning, we have to make sure it actually curves in these spots. A mistake that people could make is that they don't curve it enough, so it just kind of looks really sharp in those corners, and then you get something like this. Then we can draw the side edges of our cylinder towards the same vanishing point. And now we need to decide how long we want the cylinder to be, because we can place our ellipse over here, we can place it all the way back here, we can place it all the way back here. You can randomly decide this, so I'm going to say it's going to be over here, and now we have to repeat the exact same thing. We have the widest points on our major axis, which are over there. We have our minor axis, so all we need to do is decide where the 2 least wide points of our ellipse are going to be. There is one thing I didn't mention about ellipses yet, and that has to do with how wide they appear depending on how far away they are from us. So, with a plane that's closer to us, in this case this plane, the plane will appear this wide. The plane that's further away from us will appear this wide. Ellipses work the exact same way. The ellipse that's closer to us will appear that wide, and the ellipse that's further away from us will appear that wide. So in this case, we need to make sure that this further ellipse just appears slightly wider than the ellipse that's closer to us. And you kind of have to use your intuition to guess how wide this ellipse needs to be. But I think that looks about right. Maybe a little bit too wide though. That's basically the exercise, so let's give it another shot. This time I'm going to draw a vertical ellipse. And if you ever get confused about where the minor axis needs to be, you should think about it in terms of a box. If I draw a vertical box and I want my cylinder to be inside of the box like this, the minor axis is going to be going in the same direction as the vertical lines of this box. Which means in this case, it's not really converging to a vanishing point. Instead, it's just going up vertically. But if we had a box in 3-point perspective, there would be a vanishing point all the way up there. So in this case, the minor axis would actually be converging towards that vanishing point. So we have our minor axis, major axis is going to be 90 degrees to it. Mark how wide we want our ellipse to be on the major axis, then mark how wide we want it to be on the minor axis. Remember that when planes are super close to the horizon line, they're not going to be that wide. So in this case, our ellipse is also not going to be that wide. Then we go down vertically, decide how long you want the ellipse to be, place another major axis. We have the two widest points and then the two least wide points. Make sure that this plane is going to be a bit wider, or this ellipse is going to be a bit wider than the ellipse that's closer to us. And there you go. We can actually try to do the same thing that we did with last week's exercise and try to draw multiple ellipses in the same scene. So let's say we have a minor axis going towards a vanishing point. Then we would have a major axis at 90 degrees. Mark how long we want it to be. This plane is going to be the closest to us, meaning we might as well make it that wide. And then we draw our ellipse. Lines go into the depth, and then we would mark how wide it's going to be again, and then finish off with the ellipse cap. I also recommend drawing through the form just so that you can actually make sure that your ellipses are drawn properly. Because if you only draw this side of the ellipse, you might actually end up curving this incorrectly. Like, for example, you curve it like that, and then if you do that on the other side, it would look like this. So that's a wrong ellipse, which is why you need to draw through the form. Then let's do another one. Minor axis, again, going towards a vanishing point. Major axis going to be right here. This is how big we want the ellipse to be on the major axis. Then on the minor axis, let's say it's going to be this wide. Also, the wider the ellipse is that's closer to us, the more perpendicular this ellipse is to our line of sight. Again, if we think about it in terms of boxes, if we have a plane that's just facing us like this, it means this plane is directly facing us, right? Whereas if we draw the plane like this now, it means the plane is kind of facing away from us, right? With ellipses, it's the same thing. The more circular this ellipse is, the more it's facing us. And if it's a perfect circle, it means that it's directly facing us. So in this case, if we extend it into the depth, we go that way and that way. Also, make sure that these are actually converging to the same vanishing point as the vanishing point of the minor axis. That's pretty important so that you actually get the foreshortening right. Then let's place the major axis over here, and then the minor axis, or well, the points on the minor axis would have to be wider than the points that are closer to us. So in this case, I think this should look about right. But that's the exercise. So what I want you guys to do is fill up a whole page with cylinders like this, where you actually have the guidelines drawn. And if you'd like to participate, you can join the Discord server, which is linked in the description. And then I guess I will see you guys for next week's exercise.